Hello, and welcome to today's webinar and second installment of the IP Analytics series brought to you by Black Hills IP and the SLW Institute. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Zoom Q&A function, and it will be answered at the end of today's presentation. For those that are interested, a recording of the webinar along with a copy of the slides will be posted on the Black Hills IP website following the presentation. Today's presentation aims to deconstruct patent annuity service pricing and is presented by Jackie Spertel and Tom Marlowe. Jackie and Tom, can you introduce yourselves?
Yes, thanks, Brian. My name is Jacqueline Spertel, and I am currently the Operations Manager for Black Hills Renewals, LLC. And in a previous life, I was in-house patent counsel for Thomson Reuters for several years. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Marlowe, and I'm currently president of Black Hills IP Renewals, and also formerly ran the IP department at Fairchild Semiconductor. So now in a position where I deal with a lot of annuity matters, and previously a customer to 3 or 4 different annuity providers.
So let's get started. What exactly are annuities? Annuities are official fees paid by the patent owner to keep the patent alive and in force. You may have also heard people use phrases like renewals or maintenance fees, as well as annuities. For us, they're all really similar. Certain countries, for the U.S., for example, might call them a maintenance fee. Other countries might call them annuities or renewals. For today's purposes, they're really one and the same for us. A lot of people like to think of annuities as being very similar to a tax. You've gone through the gauntlet of getting an issued patent, or you're going through the gauntlet to get an issued patent, and these are just kind of additional fees or taxes to keep things alive and well. Also, another kind of characteristic of an annuity is because you're filing in each country to get patent protection, each country also has different annuity rules. So just like there might be new rules or different rules to obtain the patent, similar rules apply for each annuity on that. And now I'll have Tom talk in more detail around the complexity of annuities.
Sure, thanks. So, why are we talking about having to do an analysis or deconstruction of annuities and their pricing? And it is, frankly, simply because they're complicated. There's questions about, you have to compute when they're due, you have to determine how much they cost, and determine how they're paid. And these types of things depend on a number of different variables that are going to be different depending on the jurisdiction, the matter type, patent design, utility model, claim counts, application type, etc. that you're working with. For example, in the United States, which a lot of us are familiar with, you don't pay annuities until after grant. Can't really call them annuities since they aren't annual, but the maintenance fees are due after grant every 3.5 years. EP, on the other hand, are due annually after filing, well, after the 3rd year from filing. Mexico, which is a fun one, they're due quinquennially, which is a new word that means every 5 years from the filing date, but not until after it grants. Always a fun one to calculate. Japan is interesting too, because they're due after grant, but the key is in paying attention to the grant date that the annuity date is calculated from, as opposed to in the US, where the issue date and the date that the issued patent publishes, where they're the same thing. In Japan, the grant publication date and the grant date are different. So you have to make sure that you're looking at the right date. When you're looking at how much annuities cost, again, more variables can come into play. Korea and Japan, for example, take a look at how many claims you have in order to determine how much it costs. In Vietnam, the complexity goes a little bit deeper and says how many independent claims do you have. And then you have countries like New Zealand or others where there have been recent law changes, and the amount or when you pay might depend actually on the filing year or the request for examination year of your application. And then the last piece on this slide is looking at the complexities of how the annuities are paid. In some countries, you can pay them directly yourself or an annuity provider. In some countries, a registered agent has to be used in order to communicate that payment with the patent office. China and Italy are examples of this. Canada is an interesting one because sometimes agents are required and sometimes they are not. When a matter is pending in Canada, the agent is required. After grant, the agent is no longer required. So, what this complexity really means is that there's a lot greater reliance by the customer on the annuity payment provider to inform the customer, and be transparent, especially when it comes to pricing.
Exactly. Thanks, Tom. To kind of add to that, patent owners, you spend a lot of time and money and energy on obtaining these patents. So by the time an annuity comes around, or you're in the 16, 17 years of that, it can feel really daunting to start, focusing on what seems to be an inevitable fixed fee. So your provider says, this is how much it costs. And, without really looking into it further, you just say, yep, I'm going to sign the bill. Here's the invoice. Let's keep going. That's why, today we really want to make you aware and recommend you partner with a provider that can help you navigate annuities with both transparency and integrity. So, for example, it might be really helpful to have them sign a transparency and integrity pledge. We'll talk in a minute about what that might include, but if you go to the website listed here and you want a sample one, we'd be happy to send that to you. Typically, this kind of pledge, what it says is that they guarantee that there is full disclosure, that there's no hidden fees or unnecessary fees, rebates or kickbacks on there. It's important to be aware of these issues and to talk with your provider upfront about them. Even when you're price shopping, you have to look past just the annuity service fee and look to the bottom line. So how do you get to the bottom line? In order to do that, you kind of need to have an understanding of the different types of fees involved. So let's just briefly touch upon kind of the definitions of each one of these, and Tom will discuss the cost breakdowns in a moment. So we like to think of these fees in two buckets, statutory and variable. At the top of the slide here, you see a listing of three of them. The first one are official fees. Official fees are mandatory. These are what the Patent Office charges. For the U.S., that first one starts at $1,600, and then you pay every 3.5 years, as Tom mentioned. For certain pieces, they charge in their own currency, so you have to convert it to US, but the official fee is very much fixed, and you can easily go online and look up what that fee is. The next one is the official grace period or late fee. So sometimes, there's certain deadlines when you have to have your official fee in by. If you do not, of course, the Patent Office is still more than willing to take your money. They just want to charge you a little extra to do so. So again, this is a Patent Office initiated fee that they may tack on in addition to the official fee. The third one here is something Tom briefly mentioned, and that is in some countries like Japan, Korea, Vietnam, there are additional claims fees that they charge on top of that. But again, all three of these are statutory and something that the Patent Office charges you. That second bucket is variable fees, and the top one here is the agent fee. And that one, there are some countries that require you to pay through an agent. Now, you would think again, well, maybe that's more statutory, but the variability with this one is, for example, Canada. You don't have to pay through one agent. There are several agents you could go through. So the variability lies in, which agent are you paying through, and there might be some difference in pricing there. The second one listed in this bucket is the payment provider service fee. This is typically a fixed fee that the service provider, states out front. This is, not a fee that's from the patent office. It's normally based on the instructions that were made and is per matter. Lastly, there are the other fees, which is kind of a catch-all category where additional costs and fees may be included in your total. However, none of these charges are required by the patent office to keep these patents alive. And so with those kind of brief definitions, I'll let Tom break down some annuity examples.
All right, great. So let's take a look at a few quick examples, get into some numbers and how these things kind of roll up. So what we're taking a look at here are 4 example patents in various points of their life, and how these fees break out across them. So the first row is going to probably feel the most familiar. This is a first payment for a granted U.S. matter. We're going to assume that it's being paid late, so we've got that grace period fee on there. So we've got the $1,600 large entity initial fee, $160 grace period fee. In the U.S., there's no claim charge. In the U.S., you aren't required to use an agent, so no fees there. We put just an example, $50 service fee. So that's what we're going to pay this imaginary service provider so that they can stay in business and provide this service. So they get $50 for handling that instruction. And then there's really no reason to have any additional fees here. So you get a total of $1,810 with 50 of those going to the service provider and the balance as the statutory fees going to the patent office. Okay, US, pretty straightforward. Then let's take a look at this Brazilian patent on the second row. The official fee, I believe this is something like a 15-year annuity in Brazil. The official fee that's due to the patent office is 1,645 Brazilian reals. That translates to about 485 US dollars based on today's foreign exchange rates from Morningstar. If we take a look at the grace period fee, so let's say the applicant here took their time in making the decision, went into grace, that's another 823 reals, $243. And then we have in Brazil, we need to use an agent. Costs $150 because we have to use a registered patent attorney there. And then the service fee for the annuity service provider, and we get a total for paying that annuity of $928 reasonably. Germany breaks down again, 1940 euros for the official fee, which translates to about 2,061 US dollars with today's dollar to euro exchange rate. And you can see again, we've got a small grace period fee, no claims fee, no agent fee due in Germany, the provider service fee, and no additional fees. And we get our total, 2164 equivalent US dollars. And the last one on the list is the row with the Japanese patent. This is a 10-year annuity in Japan, 55,400 yen, which is equivalent to about $485. The grace period fee doubles the price. So you can see in some countries, the grace period fee is somewhat nominal. In some countries, it makes a big difference. And then a claims fee. Also, in some countries, it's nominal. In some countries, it makes a big difference. So here, we're assuming about 10 claims. If you had more claims, like 20, like an average US case, this fee would double from the claims perspective. And then we have an agent fee reasonably around 7,000 yen. Again, these things can be negotiable and will differ from service provider to service provider. And then the service provider fee, and then your total. So this kind of gives you a baseline. Okay, what what should we be expecting? So then if we take it from here and compare this to some example rates that we've seen, we can see where some additional fees and service provider revenue might come into play. So first thing you'll note is that we left the US line pretty much untouched. Usually there's not a whole lot of playing around with those numbers because they're usually fairly easy to calculate. There's only 3 of them, and there's just not a lot of room to play. When we start talking about some of the foreign countries that get charged every year, they change a lot. You start adding in foreign exchange rates. It gets easier to add some additional fees into the mix, and you'll see the headers, which were generally blue and orange and green, now all have a piece of green in them because there's potential for the annuity service provider to take a piece out of each one of these columns at this point. So let's take a quick look at the official fees in Brazil and Germany and Japan. And we'll see that all these numbers are higher than the last slide because a 10 to 20 or more % markup has been added to the foreign exchange rate. So if, let's say, you had a foreign exchange rate that was from one currency to the dollar of, say, 1.1, a foreign exchange rate markup of, say, 16% on that might get you a completely different price. Well, a marked up price, really. And that foreign exchange markup then gets applied to the official fee, to the grace period fee, and to the claims fee, because all of those end up having to be converted from US dollars into the local currency. And they're great fodder for a foreign exchange rate markup. And what that means is the difference between what the service provider had to pay the bank to do that markup and what they charged the customer essentially goes to turns into revenue for the service provider, essentially additional fees. In addition to that, you have agent fee markups at times that you should be aware of. In this example, in Brazil, on the previous slide, we had a $150 fee. So we'll say that's what the patent agent in Brazil is charging to handle this annuity payment. The service provider in this example is charging $175, which means $150 go to the Brazilian agent, and the additional $25 stay in the service provider's pocket. Germany, in this example, is interesting too, because here we see a foreign agent fee where a foreign agent is not even necessary. So in this case, the service provider is saying, I'm going to be the German agent, and I'm going to pocket that $25, even though there is really no necessity for a German agent. It's an additional place to put an additional fee. And again, with Japan, we have another markup of about $19 US dollars. While the service fees all stay static, we go to the final column, the other types of fees. And in my years, I've seen a few different names for these additional fees, whether they be country charges or foreign fees or foreign exchange fees that are added in like as a flat fee in addition to the foreign exchange rate itself. All of these types of fees have no statutory basis. They're essentially just other terms or other ways to identify a annuity service provider fee. And it's worth understanding essentially what's the difference between a statutory fee here, again, and the variable fees. And when you start getting the foreign exchange markups and the agent fee markups, it starts to get to be pretty difficult to see what is the service provider taking and what actually goes to the patent office and what goes to an agent if one is necessary. And what we can see here is what all of these markups and additional costs add are anywhere from 13 in the Brazilian case to 17 in the German case to 27 in this Japanese example. And we've seen a range from 5% increase up to 200% increase over what a reasonable charge is for that country. So what happens then, if you take that total amount and you look at the increase in cost, you can see what the actual service cost is from the customer to the service provider. And while the service fee might just say $50, in the Brazilian case, it's actually $50 plus an additional 118. In the German case, plus an additional 369, and the Japanese one plus an additional 400. Now these are just examples, and it can vary a lot depending on the service provider and depending on the country, for example. But it shows you how what seems like a very simple fee can actually be quite a lot. And if I were looking at a $450 charge to pay an annuity, I'd probably say that's not very competitive. And the problem is that it gets to be difficult to compare apples to apples if you're just looking at one component of this. And what that essentially means is, at the bottom line is that you've got to look at the totals, and you have to compare the totals from examples or from an invoice in order to tell what's actually being paid. So from here, once we have an understanding of how these things break out, and I'm sure you're thinking, well, this is actually, there's some complexity to this, so what can I as a customer do in order to work with this complexity and deal with maybe a service provider that I'm working with, or take a look at the invoices that I'm currently dealing with and paying, or if I'm shopping around. And so we've put together a few simple tips that will help that'll help in that analysis. And the first one is to ask for a list of countries that have agent fees and the amounts of those agent fees. So you get an idea of where an annuity provider is going to charge you an agent fee and how much. And then once you get that, you can dig into, are each of these required by statute? Do each of these countries require you by statute to use an agent? And are these costs that are charged just passed along, or is there a markup on them? And it'll give you a better idea of exactly what you're paying for with respect to agent fees.
Yeah, and the next one here is, are the foreign exchange rates competitive with market rates? So as Tom was showing in several examples, normally when you're looking at annuity fees, they're in the local currency, and there's some type of exchange rate that needs to occur to put it into US dollars. Well, do they just do, that conversion, or do they add some type of, markup to it, and therefore they're deriving revenue from that, currency exchange? That's a really good thing to know. You want to be able to partner with a company that, has the currency exchange, at market rates and are competitive for you.
Yeah, and at any point, you should be able to sit down with a annuity provider, either that you're working with or that you're evaluating, and either look at your invoice or look at a quote that was given and ask them to break out, what's required in this country and what's not. How do these fees that I'm being charged break out between statutory fees that's going to the patent office and what's going, say, into the pocket of the provider?
Yeah, and I touched upon this earlier as well, but getting a signed transparency and integrity pledge. You want to be able to either start a partnership or maintain a partnership with, knowing what you're being charged. And having this dialogue back and forth about what exactly are your charges, what are you getting billed for, or is this the proper cost for you, and being able to have that two-way communication and know what you're paying for.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, a certain level of trust is really important. There's a lot of complexity. You're not going to be able to stay, especially with a large portfolio, you won't be able to stay on top of every line item. So you've got to know you're working with a provider that's going to be standing behind what they're delivering. And the last item on here is requiring written notice before either the addition or the increase of any fees. This is an interesting one because it reminds me of a situation that I saw a few years ago where a company was talking about how they were able to negotiate a lower rate with a service provider, annuity service provider, and they were able to reduce that service fee from X to Y, let's just say. And when we took a look at the actual invoices that came out, we saw indeed the service fee decreased, but in the same time frame, there was an increased markup on the foreign exchange rate. So the conversion for the currency conversion rate was increased in that same time period. And incidentally, after that hard-fought negotiation, they were paying more. And it was not very clear of that until you start to really dig into the numbers. So getting some sort of a written notice before any of those increases can go into place is important. So from there, we'll jump into if there's any questions that anybody wants to ask. So that will be the end of today's webinar, and I want to make everyone aware of the next upcoming Analytics Excellence webinar series, which will be January 18th after the new year, 2017, entitled Patent Value Analytics, Algorithms and Applications.
And then there was also just a very quick question about where are the notices given by the USPTO on fees. The biggest way that I like to take a look is just Googling USPTO patent fees, and they normally have a listing and will post all the fees at that point as well. Excellent. I think that's it for today. Thank you guys very much.
All right. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Have a wonderful day.